Hello and welcome to another edition of Library in Our Houses. I'm Mrs. E and today we are in the library and I have two very special guests with me. So I decided to bring Mr. and Mrs. Goose in. I'm probably going to do this more often because they make me feel less lonely when I'm making these videos for you guys. But I thought especially for today I should have them because they have Thanksgiving outfits on. They are dressed up like pilgrims. So Thanksgiving is coming up next week, and I thought, let's learn more about the tradition of Thanksgiving. Let's learn about the history of Thanksgiving. What was the real first Thanksgiving like? Okay. And when I looked up in our catalog what kind of books we had about Thanksgiving, I found this one called Squanto and the First Thanksgiving. And I was like, who's Squanto? I've never heard of that person before. So I opened it up, and I had no idea that Squanto, this Native American man, is so important to the story of Thanksgiving that without him, there would be no Thanksgiving. So Squanto was a Native American, and Native Americans lived in America way before the explorers came, way before Christopher Columbus or any people from Europe, okay? Squanto was living here with his tribe, and when the Pilgrims came here, they didn't know how to survive here because it's way colder here than it is where the Pilgrims came from. So traditionally, the story of Thanksgiving is the Native Americans helped the Pilgrims get food for the winter, and the Pilgrims thanked them, and they had a big dinner, and that was the first Thanksgiving dinner. So we're going to learn more about Squanto and who he is and what he has to do with the story because he's very important and I had no idea until today. So on the board behind me, I just have a couple of things I want to remind everybody about. So we're reading a nonfiction book today. Okay, nonfiction means real. So Squanto is a real person who really lived. And I found this book in the Dewey Decimal section 394. So all of our nonfiction books have Dewey Decimal numbers, okay? And this one is 394. So it might be hard to see, but 394 is on that white sticker, okay? And that means it's a book about holidays. So it's the story of Thanksgiving, but it's mostly about Squanto and how he is the most important part of Thanksgiving. So the book is called Squanto and the First Thanksgiving by Joyce Kessel. So she is the author, and the illustrator is Lisa Domze. So Lisa Domze did the picture. So Mr. and Mrs. Goose are going to hang out in their pilgrim outfits while we learn about Squanto. So before I start, I just wanted to remind everybody that the story of the Native Americans and the Pilgrims and the people that came to America isn't always nice, right? The Native Americans were treated very badly by the explorers, and a lot of terrible things happened to them. And it's very important that we learn the history so that we don't repeat it. So lots of really smart people have said that it's a really good idea to learn about history because if you know what happened in the past, or you know what something, you know about your history, then you're not going to make the same mistakes in the future. You're going to learn to be better. So learning about our history makes us better. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. For thousands of years, people have set aside special days for giving thanks. People in the United States have celebrated Thanksgiving for over 350 years. How did Thanksgiving start? Most people think it started with the Pilgrims, but the story really begins with a Patuxet Indian named Squanto. Without Squanto, the Pilgrims would never have celebrated that first Thanksgiving. So this is Squanto, and he is the new person that I didn't know about until today. The Patuxet Tribe lived near the place that became Plymouth, Massachusetts, where they grew corn and hunted wild animals. They were friendly and peaceful. So the Native Americans were here before anybody else was. Okay, so the place where the Pilgrims went wasn't called Plymouth until they got there. Okay, the Patuxet Indians lived there, and it was home to them. Then an English ship came to Plymouth in the early 1600s. These Englishmen were explorers. They were looking for riches. They hoped to find gold or silver, but all they found was corn and Indians. The Englishmen had never seen corn. They didn't know what to do with it, but they thought they knew what to do with the Indians. They would sell them as slaves. So that is what I mean about terrible things in our history, but it's important to talk about it. So a lot of the white settlers that came to America took Native Americans and sold them into slavery. So the Englishmen captured a few of the Patuxet men. They put them on their ship. They took them back to England. Squanto was one of those men. In England, Squanto had to learn how to speak English. He had to work very hard, but Squanto was used to hard work. Winters in Plymouth had been long and cold. Sometimes Squanto was hungry all winter long, but the rest of the year had brought riches. The woods of his home were full of berries and wild animals, and even when he was hungry, he was free. Squanto longed for his home. He dreamed of his people and of his wild, free land. His master could see that Squanto was not happy. He felt sorry for his slave. Finally, he set Squanto free. In 1614, Captain John Smith sailed for the New World. That is the same John Smith from Pocahontas. So Pocahontas is sort of a real story. Disney changed a lot of things about it, but John Smith was a real guy that came to America, and he met Pocahontas, but he also knew Squanto. So John Smith took Squanto to America with him. So Squanto gets to go back home after he's been a slave in England. He returned at last to his people, but not for long. Aw, poor Squanto. Captain Smith sailed back to England, but he left one of his ships behind. The captain of that ship was named Thomas Hunt. Hunt traded with the Patuxets. He filled his ship with fish and animal furs. But Hunt was greedy. He wanted to make more money than the fish and furs would bring. So he filled part of his ship with Patuxet men. So this new guy is doing the same thing that happened to Squanto in the first place. So he's getting sold back into slavery again. Squanto was captured again. After only a few weeks at home, he was sailing back across the ocean. That's terrible. Hunt knew that Captain Smith would be angry with him for capturing the Patuxets, so Hunt sold the Patuxets in Spain instead of England. So on the way back, Thomas Hunt knew that he would get in trouble for enslaving all these men, so he sold them to the Spanish so his boss wouldn't find out. So that is so evil. Squanto's new masters were Catholic monks. They taught him the Christian faith. They were kind to him, but Squanto was sadder than ever. All he wanted was his freedom. At last, the monks took pity on him. They helped him get to England. In England, Squanto was able to find a ship going to America. He was on his way home again, but what great sadness he found when he arrived. Squanto wandered through Patuxet villages. He could not believe his eyes. All he found were empty huts. The cornfields were black and dead. All of his people were gone. Squanto was the only living Patuxet. So after all of that sadness and being away from his family, when he gets back, he finds out that all of his family and everybody who's like him is gone. What had happened? A nearby tribe told him. The ships from England had brought smallpox germs. Smallpox was a new disease to the Patuxets. They died quickly from it. The disease had killed all of them. After those years of longing for his home, Squanto found he had no home. He moved in with the nearby tribe. The Pilgrims landed at Plymouth on December 21st, 1620. Squanto had been back for a year. So Squanto went and found other Native Americans to live with once he realized all of his family was gone. So they took him in. So now the Pilgrims are getting here. See the buckle or the hats, like how Mr. Goose has that? So here are the Pilgrims. They had left England to look for a new home. They wanted to live where they could worship the way that they chose. They were lucky to land at Plymouth. The Indians there were afraid of smallpox, so they would not fight for their land. The Indians just watched from a distance. So smallpox was a disease that Europeans brought to America, and the Native Americans had never had it before. So it's kind of like chickenpox. So we gave it to them, and a lot of them died from it because they didn't have immunity. So that's sort of what we're talking about with COVID with immunity. So it's like people get sick if you've never had it before, like we've never had COVID before. That's why it's such a big problem. So for the Native Americans, smallpox was a big problem. So Squanto knew that the Pilgrims were there, but they're not going to do anything because the Native Americans are afraid to get sick again. So they're just like, okay, well, I guess we'll just leave them alone and let them take what they want, which is sad. So they wouldn't fight. They just watched. The Pilgrims had a hard time, though. They did not know how to plant. They did not know how to build. They made little cold houses out of mud, clay, and sticks. They were not used to the cold. They did not have much to eat. Half of the Pilgrims died during their first terrible winter. By the spring of 1621, there was only 55 of them left. So that's tough. They had it real tough. That was when Squanto decided to help the Pilgrims. So Squanto saw the Pilgrims struggling really bad to survive. So he felt bad for them, which is so amazing and heroic, because think of how much Squanto's been through and how terrible the explorers have treated him so far. And yet he sees these people struggling and he helps them anyway. That he has a big heart. So he knew how to speak English. That's another thing. Remember how Squanto went to England, so he learned to speak English so he could talk to the Pilgrims and help them. He could tell them what to do. In 1621, Squanto went to visit the Pilgrims. After his first visit, he never left them. So he went back and he stayed with them and taught them everything that they needed to know. Squanto taught the Pilgrims how to find animals to shoot for meat. He showed them how to build warm houses. He helped them make friends with nearby Indians. Squanto showed the Pilgrims how to plant. He told them to watch the leaves on the trees. When they were as big as a squirrel's ear, the corn should be planted. He taught the Pilgrim women how to cook the corn. Squanto and the Pilgrims worked very hard all spring and summer. That fall, the Pilgrims had a good harvest. Because of Squanto's help, they would have plenty to eat through the winter. They would also have warm homes. So remember, we were talking in the Halloween episode about how Halloween is really a harvest festival, okay? And we've been talking about harvests a lot this year because we did the Greek myth of Persephone and she went to the underworld. If we haven't done that story in your class yet, we'll do it soon. But that is all about the harvest. The harvest is such a big deal, okay? Because in the winter, it's winter in many different places in the world, and it's really hard to grow things in the winter. So it's important that we save up food, and that way we have it. So the Pilgrims didn't have any food in the winter. They didn't save any up because they didn't know how. So Squanto helped them plant corn. It's amazing. The Pilgrims wanted to celebrate. They wanted to give thanks. They decided to have a feast, so they wanted to have a big party. They sent Squanto to invite an Indian chief named Massasoit to their dinner. They thought that Massasoit might bring a few people with him. Thanksgiving feasts were not new to the Indians. Their feast was called the Green Corn Dance. Remember, lots of people all over the world have harvest festivals, so the Native Americans and the Pilgrims had something in common. Their harvest festival was called the Green Corn Dance. It was a huge feast. So Massasoit brought 90 people to the Pilgrims' Thanksgiving feast. The Pilgrims were very surprised, but they tried not to show it. There were 55 Pilgrims and 92 Indians. That made 147 people. The Pilgrims were not sure they had enough food for everyone, so they had to get busy. For 3 days, the women did nothing but cook. When the day for the feast arrived, everything was ready. What a feast it was! The Indians had brought 5 deer. The women made these into stew. They roasted turkeys, geese, and ducks. Sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Goose. They cooked lobster, eels, clams, oysters, and fish. They made biscuits and bread. They roasted corn for cakes. They boiled corn with molasses to make Indian pudding. There's plenty of dried fruit for everyone. Popcorn balls were invented by the Indians in that area, so there may have even been popcorn balls. So there was popcorn at the first Thanksgiving. Who knew? Usually the Pilgrims thought games were a waste of time, but on this day they played. The men held contests. They leaped and jumped and raced. Everyone showed off. The Pilgrims marched. The Indians shot arrows, and people ate until they could hardly move. That sounds like a normal Thanksgiving. What a happy day that first Thanksgiving was. The Pilgrims had new warm homes. They had new friends and plenty of food. They knew they would be able to live through the next winter, and none of it would have happened without a Patuxet Indian named Squanto. Thanks, Squanto. That was awesome. I had no idea about Squanto. He was very important to the first Thanksgiving. Mr. and Mrs. Goose want you to know that they miss you. They miss you so much. I miss you so much. I hope everybody has a lovely Thanksgiving. Goodbye, my little turkeys.